Welcome back.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show to take place right here, in the space between the turns in your favorite games. I'm Brendan Hansen.
I'm Jake Friedman.
I'm Pete Wissinger.
I'm Paul Solomon.
And this is the podcast about decisions in games.
And today, in our 200th episode, we will be discussing our favorite decisions in board games. A monumentous episode, a big number, the first ever episode with 4 hosts on a single episode. But before we get into any of that, Brendan, I just want to throw it straight over to you to ask, what are your thoughts? Episode 200, what comes to mind?
Gosh, I think it's so cool, Jake. I don't know that when we set out 4 years ago almost to do this show, that we ever, if we knew we were going to get to episode 200, and I certainly don't think we ever imagined the show would take the shape that it has, in terms of the types of conversations we've had, the types of episodes we've made, the people that we've talked with, the games that we've played together. I just think it's really cool. It's clear that Decision Space is a living thing with this ethos and this identity, and most of all, that it's flexible and that it evolves. And I think that that's really cool. And that's the product of, you and I working together, but also other people on this show, I think, being emblematic of this openness to change and to growth in a really cool way. And I think that's what makes me happy and excited. What about you, Jake? 200 episodes on. What's on your mind?
I definitely did not expect at the start of the show to go 200 episodes. I definitely didn't expect for you to be here 200 episodes on. And in fact, I've told this story before, but you were, when I first thought of Decision Space as a show, I thought, okay, I'll talk about a board game every week. We'll talk about our favorite decisions in that game, and I'll have a new host every week to do that with me. Brendan was the first person I asked, and afterwards thought it was pretty fun and said, well, can I come on again next week? And at that point I was like, all right, you're the permanent host. And so it's just been amazing that we end up here 200 episodes later, still doing this together, and hopefully many more episodes to go. And it certainly would not have ever got that far on merits of my concept alone, because I think I really wanted to talk about the decisions in games, like heuristics, getting good at games, like what are the pain points and strategies that are exciting. And you really brought that lens of like, well, how do we even begin to talk about that when we don't have shared language, terminology? And so just having this conversation with you have been so fulfilling and enriching. And I think that's just something that really came to define the show that I'm just grateful that you brought into it.
I just want to hop in and say that I want to say thank you to you guys for doing 200 episodes. Obviously, I'm a friend of you both, but I'm also a fan. And so, there's 195 episodes of this show that don't have me on it, and I'm just grateful that they exist. And I think it's really cool, the community that's been built up around this and on Discord. So thank you to you both.
Yeah, just to echo, I actually, didn't get into the show until about 2 years ago, and I still am working through the back catalog. By the way, I listen to old Decision Space episodes on my way to and from work. Like the breadth that you all have done. Like I remember thinking at one point, like how the heck do they do this every week? Like the level of depth you all go into is just so impressive. Like I think it would be impressive if you did it every month. And the fact that you do it every week, I think, is just what makes this special. And yeah, I'm really proud to be a part of episode 200.
I think that that's very kind of all of you. Jake, I'm so glad I'm here too. I think this might be the longest sustained conversation in which I've learned something continuously every time I meet and talk with each of you. Jake, certainly, like you, for the longest of that. And it's just cool. And I find when we, record a few or take a break or just take a break, I miss the reflection and learning. And just like playing games with others, there's this powerful interaction that comes out of like thinking on my own about games is fun. I enjoy it. But thinking in conversation is just something else that's special. So I guess what I want to say is just thanks for talking about games. I love learning about them, and y'all teach me a lot.
You're welcome. And not the last, but one other entity, I guess, to evoke is just our listeners. So many people have been with us since the beginning or gone back through the back catalog, or even if you're joining us later on, maybe this is your first episode. This show certainly would not be what it is without the community of listeners. Special shout out to people on our Discord that are just in there churning away, talking about games, teaching all of us about games every day. So much we've just taken from there so that we could bring to the show, dissect more, and then learn further from that. That's really been the cycle that sort of sustained a lot of this conversation. So there would not have been 200 episodes without an amazing community of listeners, an amazing community of Patreon supporters as well. Shout out to y'all. So thanks everyone for making this special milestone happen.
One of the things we really endeavored to do, Jake, is learn how to better talk about games. Like you alluded to that just in your little preamble. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about decisions in games and why we love them. We're each coming with 3 different games and specific decisions in those games that illustrate a decision we love in games. And I think that's something we do on this show that I'm really excited to talk about. So I don't think let's just do it. Let's talk about decisions in games. So Pete, what's one of your favorite decisions in games ever? Tell us about it. What's the game? What are we doing?
Well, I would be happy to kick it off. So I'm kind of known, maybe even especially on this podcast, as the guy who's very into highly interactive games. However, I do like non-super in-your-face games. Like sometimes I think about the fact that Dominion is in my top 10 games of all time. And I think why, right? What is it about Dominion that puts in my top games? Because Dominion has really almost no direct player interaction at all. And I think about other engine building games that I really love, like Race for the Galaxy, or one that Paul introduced me to, Gizmos. And I think that what these engine building games do for me, that gives me a decision I love, is the decision to control the tempo of the game. I think my favorite thing in an engine building game is when I get to decide, okay, my engine is now humming. It's time to start cashing in. And I can sort of convert from playing the building game to the reaping rewards game. And actually, as an opponent, when I feel the other player pushing the end of the game and I don't feel ready, I actually kind of like that chase feeling where I feel like I'm getting buried and I have to catch up. And so engine building games that allow me, the player, to choose how fast we're going and to push the end of the game if I think I'm winning is a decision that I always love in those sorts of engine building games. So for me, that is my favorite type of decision in a not traditionally maybe interactive game.
That's awesome. I do also love tempo. I'll talk about that later, but it's one of the things that makes Keyforge such a compelling game to me is how much do I want to build my board or use it to rush towards amber versus take down my opponent's board? What are the key parts of their engine that have to be disassembled so that I can operate? I think it's a really fun part of the interaction in games for sure.
There's not a lot of decisions that you can I mean, there are, but this is one of those types of decisions that you can just build a whole game on top of, right? This core question of how long will this game be is robust enough that it can carry a game on its back. And it informs like Dominion, that choice is now the time to do I buy the estate? Is now the time to go in? Probably not if it's an estate. But if it's worth a little bit more. But I just love that this decision, Pete, is one where it feels like a non-interactive game, but you're having to consider a lot about the potential of everyone else's cards at the same time, decks at the same time that they've built. So even though you're not directly interacting or directly competing, you're still really engaged with how do I exist in this game? How do I exist in this world of the table? Am I fast? Am I slow? What am I doing to the game state to assert that identity? And I think that's cool when it kind of asks you to compare yourself. And it's a big enough problem that it can just take up all of the interactive space of the game.
Yeah, and just one more note on it. I think that I have trouble with some sort of parallel puzzle games when we're all going at the same pace, and then just at the end we see who did better.
Sure.
I like to kind of feel that someone has made
Mm.
decisions that are pushing me, or being the one who is doing the pushing. And so that's why that's one of my favorite decisions.
People will argue until the end of time about whether like these kind of more solitaire feeling game are interactive or not, in the same way that, you know, running a race in real life is somewhat interactive, somewhat less interactive than other sports competitions. But I think you've hit on something so important in Dominion or other games that have a more interactive feel, despite we're not actually punishing each other through the mechanisms, which is that, like, can you see the pack? Like, can you figure out where in the pack you are? Whereas, you know, if we're all just taking 10 turns and then points are hidden and we calculate them at the end, that doesn't have that same kind of push pull feel. So, anyway,
Fantastic. I'm going to hop in and go with my first one here, and I'm actually going to follow up on the tail end of Pete's. I went pretty wide with these, and I'm going to narrow them down as I talk about it. My first type of decision I love is the question of whether now is the right time. And so I've got three categories here. One is tempo and pivot points, elective scoring, and building value. So tempo and pivot points is what Pete just talked about. Something like Dominion, certainly, or Keyforge, or Gizmos, or Ticket to Ride, even. Is now the right time to go for the little space that I definitely need, or should I keep drawing cards a bit more and build up this gigantic grip of cards? Or Star Realms, one of my favorite games of all time, is very much about where are we in the game state? Do I need scrap now? Will health work? So that's kind of very similar to Pete's. But then elective scoring shows up in games like Palaces of Carrara, Heaven and Ale, Kodama, and Herbaceous, which often tell you you can score this thing probably one time at a time of your choosing. And in Heaven and Ale, there are these spaces on the board that ask you, are you going to jump forward to go grab that thing? Or really, there's only so many that are going to happen in the game. How many of them are going to be yours? In Herbaceous, you get 4 different sets of cards that you get to score. Um, and it's about, is now the right time to grab those cards out of the middle and score this, or will I decide that maybe later I'll get a better shot at this? And the third type here is building value. I've talked about this on the show before. We played that connections game. I can't remember the episode number. Maybe one of our historians will find it for us. And this is building value. In a game like Coloretto, you put cards out and these lots build value, and you ask yourself, is now the right time to take it? The same thing happens in Yummy World by Phil Walker Harding, a game called Dice Heist. It's also true in Foundations of Rome to some extent, because things come in at a very high value and they start to drop, and you think, is now the right time to take my turn to claim a lot at its current price, or should I wait? Ra, Priests of Ra famously has this building value, is now the right time to call the auction. And I just want to tie back. My favorite game in this space is Herbaceous because it does 2 of these. Cards build up in the middle of the table until someone decides now is the right time for me to gather those and score my sets of all equals. So that is one of my favorite types of decisions in games, is now the right time.
I'll jump in because I think Raw is one of my absolute favorite games. And I think that is a perfect way to describe kind of the central punchy decision of that game. Is like, when do I declare Raw? And it is truly an exceptional decision, exceptional mechanism that enables, I think, so much skill, so much interaction, so much interplay, but also is immediately emotionally evocative for players. Absolutely love that implementation of this decision.
I feel like it's now the right time is perfect, Paul, because this type of decision, one thing I love about it is you usually get a lot of feedback. The flip side is some percentage of the time, now was not the right time, right? The game usually tells you. Like in the Palaces of Carrara, there's all these shared scoring opportunities, and you could do it now. And typically doing it now feels bad. You know your potential, if you just wait, is going to be higher. But one of you at this table just come over and just grab it and snatch it right away. So you'll never have it. So it's simultaneously forcing you to think like, how greedy am I? And also considering this timing puzzle layered on top. I don't know. I agree, Paul, that these like is now the time right puzzles are great because there's never typically sometimes you have slam dunk answers in games where you're just like, oh yep, that's the one. These are often decisions you feel good making in the moment. Maybe you thread the needle and you just know sometimes, but usually you're not sure until after the fact if it was right or wrong. And that's pretty cool, right?
Yeah, I just want to go back here real quick and say Ra has a second layer, which is that is now the right time to use this bidding chip, right? Because I'm only going to get so many opportunities. And Carrara also has this tempo that we're talking about. So a lot of these games mix those together and become really fun for me.
I love what Brendan said kind of about tying into that human emotion of greed. I think that is like a central piece of the experience of this, like, is now the right time mechanism. And that ties well into the first game I want to talk about, which is the Resistance. And my absolute favorite decision in that game is, who do I trust? The reason I like absolutely am enamored with this decision, and why I'll keep playing the base Resistance forever, right? I don't need any more than that because I will never not find it interesting to sit around the table with friends and just have a good old fashioned witch hunt and try to see if, based on the little bits of information and picking up cues from other players, if I can answer this fundamental question correctly for myself, which is like, who around this table can I trust? And I love it because it's such a fun game decision, but also, as I was coming up with the list of how could I possibly come up with my 3 favorite decisions in games, this jumped out to me because I think it is the most like human I feel playing games. I get it right, I feel amazing. I get it wrong, I feel so truly betrayed in my core, and like I don't understand anything about the people I'm with in a way that elevates even higher than getting betrayed in like a troops on a map game or something like that. So that was my number 3, which is, who do I trust in the Resistance?
Um, the decision to trust is such a great decision because it makes me think of a totally other type of game, which is playing partnership trick taking games, which I know here's Pete shoehorning trick taking in. But a game that I grew up loving is Spades. Okay. And in Spades, you and your partner share a bid. Okay. Which means that if my partner is actually going to come up short, I can step in and take some tricks for them. But there is this question of like, do they know what they're doing, right? Do I trust that they've got something in their back pocket? Or are they trusting me to know that they need help? And I think there's a reason that, like, apparently, real bridge players marry their bridge partners, right? Because, like, there is such, I think, an intimate trust in being on a team in a game, especially a team where you're not allowed to, like, assure someone they can trust you. You just have to sort of give up some control to another person. I think a lot of modern co-ops are doing this really well. Like I talked about the gang on our best of the year episode. And obviously the Resistance is a favorite of mine as well. But I think that that element of trust comes in play in more than just social deduction games is all I'm saying.
Totally agree with that. And I actually love so much what you said about not being able to prove why you can be trusted or not, because that's what makes it so magical in the Resistance. I can't show you anything, right? I don't have clear evidence of my trust. You just have to believe me. And more importantly, I, as the player, have to find other people around the table to believe.
So I also have the Resistance as containing one of my favorite decisions in games. But Jake, you've gone with deciding who to trust. And for me,
Who
we
not to
covered the
trust.
Resistance. Well, more or less, but it's slightly different. That's kind of the same decision. But so in episode 155, we did a deep dive of the Resistance. So if you want to hear Jake and I cover it more, listen to that episode. But Jake, my favorite moment is when I am not the Resistance, right? When I it is clear to me at the table who I can trust and not trust because I am a spy. So I know who I can trust. I know who I can't trust. But what I don't always know is what the other spy is going to do, what they're going to say, how they're going to vote, what teams they're going to add. And the Resistance is one of the only examples of games that I can think of where you have this emergent prisoner's dilemma moment. So if you've played the Resistance, you've played it enough, you might know what I'm talking about, especially at 5 players. You can end up at this point sort of in the middle of the game where both spies are sent on a mission and one of you really needs to fail the mission if you're going to win. If both of you fail the mission, you're in trouble because typically then it becomes clear who to avoid setting up missions because you've given yourself away that was a spy heavy mission. The Resistance says, okay, we'll focus elsewhere. Great. You've basically given the game away. If you both just give the mission a success, which you could do, then you're going to lose because time's going to run out. So there's this moment where you can't really communicate across the table and you have to figure out, do we both betray? And some players will take this even further. They'll make it clear. And through performing on the stage of the table, just make the betrayal publicly, right? Jake and I are both spies. Just stand there, just look Jake in the eye and say, Jake is a spy. I know Jake is a spy, just passionately. And someone will say, how do you know? And you say, I just know. And then maybe you'll have some elaborate scheme to convince everyone you're speaking the truth, but you know, and you're not. But I just love that moment where the game, you're supposed to be trusting each other. It invites you to betray one another or not. And you have this simultaneous choice around, am I going to throw Jake under the bus? Am I failing? Is he failing? What are we doing? But yeah, I love that moment.
I want to add here that Resistance is not a game that I love. It is a 1 out of 3 for me. I would choose not to play it. But the way you've talked about it actually has given me a little appreciation for that moment is very cool. And
Yeah.
I've played a lot of Deception, Murder in Hong Kong, and I've played a lot of Werewords, and I like those style of games. And there are some very cool emergent, and I've played a lot of diplomacy, sort of social tactics that come out.
And it's just perhaps this is just a symptom of doing 200 episodes together. We've come up with the same game for one of our 3 favorite decisions. I just wanted to make a note of that.
I think we came in that was a one true OTD, one true decision from the very beginning.
Yeah.
We both just love the Resistance.
Though
Paul,
interestingly, you prefer being a spy and I prefer being Resistance. Huh? Interesting.
I don't know that I prefer it. The decision is burned in my soul.
I prefer being a spy every time, and it is a 3 out of 3 for me. So Paul's the odd man out. He's the spy on this one.
Devious
It
Pete.
happens. I've given myself away.
Well, let's get to Pete's second game on his list.
It does actually happen to be related, because my second one I'm going to talk about is the decision to be deceptive. I think back to an all-time classic Decision Space episode, which is your interview with T. Win about agency as art and games. And I think that what I've learned through games is that you get to behave in games because of the magic circle in ways that you don't get to behave in your regular everyday life. So the decision to tell a lie and to try and convince one of your friends that what you are saying is true, even though it is not something I get to do in my daily life. And weirdly enough, I've learned by playing games that I'm pretty good at it. And when you feel someone eating out of the palm of your hand, when you know that you are feeding them untruth, it is this both icky but also so exciting feeling because you know that you all are going to laugh about it at the end if you've built the magic circle correctly, right? And so I think I am, unlike you all, more of a fan of Avalon than the Resistance because I think the Merlin character adds a level of deception to both sides.
What does it do?
So in Avalon, Merlin is on the good team and he actually knows who the bad guys are. And at the end, if the bad guys can guess which of the good guys was Merlin when they lose, then they actually win, which means that the good guys are all covering for somebody, but they don't know who they're covering for. And so if you're Merlin, you're trying to communicate and not, sort of in that kind of decrypto sort of way. Some other games where this is a fun decision is like bluffing games. When my friends first got into tabletop games, we would sit around all night and play like Skull or Coup, which are so simple games where the only real decision in the game is the decision to lie. And the other one that I just have to bring up is my favorite board game, Root, where Root does not have any lies built into the game, but it's one of these player balanced bash the leader games where the board state can be kind of fuzzy, especially since every player has totally different scoring mechanisms. And the decision to underplay my board state and convince the rest of the table that actually Jake is about to win and you all should not care about what I'm doing because Jake's the real problem, even if I know that I'm about to win, is something like that. And those decisions would make me feel like such a jerk in my regular everyday life to lie to my friends or my family or my students. But in the magic circle of a game, I get to try out that agency, and it's just so awesome to have a space to kind of play a role like that.
Before you finished, I was going to ask the question of, do you like doing that in Root? Because I know it's a game you like. And for me, it's like, I hate that. I hate that so much. Like, I like it in the bluffing, in the social deduction games. But just for me, for my preferences, like, I totally feel, in one case, I feel great if I fooled you. In another case, like, I feel so icky and weird, I don't even want to do it if it's like, some type of this, like, a Euro game or like more of a strategy game, and I'm saying I'm not winning, Brendan's winning, when I like know I'm winning. That to me feels different. I'm not a fan of that.
I just talked a little bit about diplomacy. And one of my I got deep in diplomacy when I really started, like right before I played Ticket to Ride, I was deep on that. And the lying and the betrayal is huge in that game. It's like, and it feels so satisfying to be so evil. And I resonate with what you
Mm.
said there, Pete, about like, you're not allowed to do that. And it's almost weird to recognize that part of yourself, but to have an opportunity to like explore it is fun. And it's also one of these games where is now the right time is a big piece. Is now the right time to stab Russia, or do we keep on? And how do I convince them that actually we should all be looking at Germany right now?
And so Jake, you saying that you hate that in strategy games. And I think that's totally valid. And that's why I said it totally depends on the magic circle. Like, if you are playing with a group of highly competitive, conniving people, but I would never teach someone Root and then lie to them about the game state. I think that there is this magic circle relationship where it has to be right for everybody to enjoy that type of play. And then when it happens, it actually creates very memorable moments, which is something I look for in games. And so I totally hear you. And I actually think that's totally valid, because it does require a level of this person has the tools to know that I'm lying, right? So I can't be like some sort of used car salesman telling you the car is fine and you have no way of really knowing if that's true.
I love that, Pete, your example has sort of highlighted these two very different types of deception in games. One of them is objective, right? When you're playing Coup, Coup's this game where you have these different roles and you assert, I am this role, so I will do this power. And
The
people,
Duke is the role, by the way. The Duke is the role that every single person has in Coup. Anyway, I'm sorry, Brendan.
well, no, you might claim to say, I'm the Duke, so I get to do X. And then there are other roles where if people can guess your role, they can call you out and punish you severely for being right or wrong about what you are. More or less, that's the frame of the game, right? So there's an objective truth hiding underneath a card in front of you, and that's so different than playing diplomacy, Paul, and having this sort of like, we're going to read the game state, and I'm sitting across the table from you. You're playing Russia, I'm playing France or whatever. We're going to look at it, and we are both communicating, and I might be telling the truth about what I think is happening in the game and what I'm going to do, and you might not be, but you might then make the decision to trust me. And there's this sort of spectrum that's really cool, and life has both of those moments, right? There's moments where we sort of see things differently, and then there's moments where there's an objective truth. And I love that these different types of games let us explore both of those cases, right? Where in Root, you might have one person at the table passionately believing the birds are winning when it's clear to the person who's played the most that they're not winning, but they just kind of jump in and they're like, yeah, look, guys, the birds on the board, they're just everywhere. They're going to win. And I think that those are nuanced, different, but importantly different things that have a different experience behind them too. I typically feel less good, though more powerful, with the Root example, where if I can make everyone believe something that's just subjective, but I get everyone on my subjectivity bus, versus I was clever and I got y'all to believe I was the Duchess when I was actually the ambassador or whatever.
I like what you said there about sort of like the objective versus the subjective, and that actually plays into my next type of decision. Um, you guys have made a I don't know, a tradition of talking about opacity in decisions. How clear are the choices? And a lot of the games that I like have very clear. This is a 2 point game. This is a 5 pointer. But I actually prefer this type of decision when it's less clear, when it's more opaque, and that is, what is this worth? Again, speaking broadly, what's this worth? Auction games do this a lot. I love auction games. Big Top, For Sale, Modern Art, and again, Raw auction game. But there's a couple others that I want to bring up that ask what this is worth in a different way. And one of my favorite types is the time track jumps in games. I think my first Kickstarter game was Lunarchitects by Daniel Cunningham, sort of a Glenmore 1.5. And I have Glenmore 2 and Heaven and Ale and First in Flight from Genius Games or Artana Games, all have this time track. And the question you have to ask yourself is, I know that that tile is coming and I know that it's good for me, but how much is it worth jumping up to grab that thing? Because if I jump up there, I might not get turns for a while. And I just love that when I get a chance to play in that. And I think that's part of the reason I will pull Lunarchitects off the shelf for just forever. The other one, which I think is a really unique twist, it's a sort of an auction. And I think it's often said like all games are auctions. We could talk about that another time. But this is a type of auction which is sort of a name your price auction. I call them price offers. Isle of Skye is kind of my favorite example of this, where I get 3 tiles and I have to decide very directly, what is this tile worth? What am I willing to pay for this tile? And what would I expect someone else to pay for this tile? In other words, how much money would I take for this tile? Uh, Castles of Mad King Ludwig does this as well. Two of my very favorite games, both of which use single resources. These are just money that you're putting up. I typically like a lot of games that have single resources, but Jake, I think you've played a game that has this with multiple resources. Correct me if I'm wrong, but in Key Harvest, don't you put up a price offer and say, I'm willing to pay, a pumpkin and a whatever for this tile? And someone has a chance to, before it gets back to you, buy it at that price. But if they don't, you pay that price. I think it's such a cool and clever, almost an I cut you choose transition or style of decision where, you know, I'll take the resource or the tile. And as that goes around the table, you can choose which one.
I didn't know we were going to be getting to Key Harvest on this episode, but I'm so excited that we're here. Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And that's an interesting case because on one hand, having the more different types of resources, I think there's 3 different like vegetable goods in that game. Um, it creates both the opportunity to like evaluate something fairly, but also the opportunity for you to be like really strategic and price something in a way that's impossible for other players, because I know that Paul can't produce pumpkins right now. So by just throwing one pumpkin out there, maybe there's the opportunity that I can like steal this for a really cheap price. Really fascinating game. And yeah, I love that. I love that mechanism, but I think it almost comes through less there than in something like Isle of Skye or something where you just have like a single currency that we're all just saying like, like what is the monetary, in-game currency value of these different things?
I love too that here you have in this overarching question, Paul, what is this worth? You're coming at it from multiple angles, right? In auctions, what is this worth to me is the question of the day. Like, if I get this painting of this painter in modern art, at the end of the game, how many points do I think that will be worth? Based on the knowledge of what's in my hand and what's on the table. Versus Castles of Ad King Ludwig, in that game, it's what is this worth to other people? Or if other people don't buy it, what am I willing to pay if it gets back to me and I actually really want it? And it kind of, I love that it's two sides of the same coin. I don't know that I'd always thought of it that way. Like, yeah, on paper, yes. But the fact that they're that innately connected, and the Castle of Mad King Ludwig, that mechanism is so good. If there wasn't so much downtime, I think we'd see it more. So, Paul, what we need is that mechanism simultaneous choice. So if you want to design something together, just like let
Yeah.
me know.
Okay,
Let me
great.
know.
We'll work
Okay.
on that.
Okay.
I don't have a ton to add, but I do want to say that Paul and I play games together a lot, even though we have very different tastes. But one thing that we both appreciate a lot is a good auction game. And to me, actually, this does play into the last decision I talked about, because in like modern art, one of my favorite things is talking up whatever I put up for auction to try and get other people to overpay for it, which is deceptive in a way. Yeah, so that's just a layer to put on there.
I love the inherent deception of the auctioneer being something that exists in modern art just as it exists in real life, right? That's why you would pay an auction company to come out and like get the people going to go through the estate or whatever. I wanted to highlight, it's interesting you mentioned that that's something that Paul, you and Pete agree on is auctions, because I think, to bring in one of our decision space frames, something we've been trying on a little bit more lately, is there sort of the spectrum between searching for the right move, which is something that comes through really strongly in games like Tikal or Five Tribes or Mexico, which we've covered recently. And on the other end of that spectrum, evaluating of sort of like, I don't have a lot of options. There's not a lot of different things I could be doing here. Instead, I have one or two things to do, but like you can really think hard and think deeply about the way to approach that. And I think deciding like what something's worth is far on that evaluate side of things, as is, trick taking or setting games, kind of like evaluating that starting hand. So it makes sense to me that y'all find kind of alignment sort of on that evaluate type of decision. All right. Am I up next? Is it my turn? Perfect. Well, I'll just keep talking and jump into my second uh, favorite decision of all time. And this one maybe is slightly a cheat because it's actually something that happens before the game even starts. And my favorite decision is, what should I bring to this game? And chief among that, in that kind of decision space, if you will, is deck construction in a game like Magic the Gathering. This was really my sort of first decision space love, in that, as a teenager getting really into Magic the Gathering, I would spend my Paul, you're not going to want to listen to this, but I would spend my entire math class just in my notebook brainstorming deck lists, and and like trying to just purely theory craft, like what would it look like if I put these cards together, what other cards could I combine with that and bring in. And then I would get home from school, with my friends, and okay, it was just me by myself, but I would like then put those cards together, shuffle them up, and kind of just see what happened. And I think it's that makes me just love this type of decision, which exists in other places too. It exists in kind of like pre-game drafts and something like Age of Innovation, where you're kind of putting together different things to come up with a faction. It exists in Rift Force. It also exists in like the more meta game setting in a game like Keyforge, already mentioned, which is like, which of these decks that I own do I think is like best positioned to like succeed in this tournament setting or something like that. But to me, deck construction in Magic will always be number one, because like it was kind of the first time in the context of like a hobby game or a board game that I like really got deep into this specific decision and actually like started to find beauty in it. Like I would come up with these decks. I would see other decks that people would bring to tournament and like genuinely start like appreciating it as a form of art, which is perhaps the nerdiest thing I've ever said on this podcast, but it's true nonetheless. And we're at episode 200, so I'm just going to let it all hang out.
A quick point of order. I think that, theory crafting in math class is doing a lot more math than a lot of people do in math class. So you have my full permission. I also just want to go back to Dominion because at the start of the game, as you decide, maybe you have a bunch of these expansions and you have 50 different options for what to put out in your 10. Um, you're imagining like, how is this game going to play out if I choose these, if I set it up like this? You have a similar decision heading to game night. What games do I want to bring with me from my collection, and what type of game night is that maybe going to create? And thinking about the people that are going to be there, I think that these types of decisions are really fun parts of the meta game of being a board gamer.
Richard Garfield, when he talks about Magic the Gathering, also will the word he specifically will use often is when he's talking about Magic the Gathering, designing it initially, is he uses the word equipment, right? A very sports term of what equipment do I want to bring to the game? And in some ways, Jake, this is the most important decision of all for me too. Like I love this decision because this is what game do I want to play? What do I want this game to be like? And Magic, Paul and Pete, last week we were talking about options plus agency equals expression. And this is that, right? Building a deck in math class in your head is you have a huge amount of agency in Magic. You have 60 cards, you can put whatever 60 cards in that deck you want. If it's the type of constructed deck Jake was building in math class, I'm almost certain. And your options are every card you own because it's middle school and you're playing Magic. So that's a huge amount of expression. And I think it's so interesting, Jake, that you came from the position of it felt like art to me, right? Art is a medium of expression. So through options and agency, in games, we get to expression, which to you get to art. I think that's just so cool. And we're gonna do an episode on expression games. We just have to.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. And I think a part of this that you guys are really bringing to the fore in your examples of sort of like the metagame of game night too, which is true in Magic deck construction, is you don't get to know what's going to happen until you see it all come together, like as you're playing it. So I think that's part of what makes this so endlessly fun and interesting to me is you can do all the planning, all the thinking you want about what games to bring to game night, what cards to include in your deck, but you're not going to get to like enjoy the fruits of that labor until you take a risk and like put yourself out there, and then you get to see what happens.
I think what this also illustrates is that for all of us, and I think for a lot of gamers, we think about games more than we get to play them, right? Like we always wish we were playing a game. And anytime a game gives you a way to interact with it when you're not playing it is just super cool. Like, I don't know about you all, but this is part of what makes this podcast so special, right? Is that, I get to think about games and talk about games when I'm not playing them. And I think that deck construction element is a way to sort of engage with a game outside of play.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll agree that this podcast, even for us as hosts, giving us a chance to like think about the podcast when we're not on the podcast, it sort of like keeps you going. The same is true, of course, about designing games, gives you a way to sort of interact with games outside of playing games. I don't always have my pals around me.
Well, I think that brings me to my next decision then, which is not as big as expression or art. But it is, I want to talk about Reiner Knizia. I don't think that for me, I could do this episode and not mention a Knizia game. One of my favorite designers of all time. Maybe one of the most important game designers aesthetically of our age. I don't know if we can say of all time. But Babylonia is his favorite game of mine to this day. Jake's making faces at me.
You said
I don't
his
know why.
favorite game of mine.
His favorite game of yours or your favorite game
Yeah,
of
I think-
his?
I was speaking in third person. No, my favorite, his favorite game of mine. Wait.
He's a big plumes guy.
Anyway, okay. So Babylonia, it's a tile laying game, right? And you're adding these different pieces to the board. You have these tiles that have different faces on them, and you can use them to do different things. But ultimately, there's these three ways to score points in the game. There's farms, there's cities, and there's networks, and they all kind of combine. They're all related. There's also ziggurats, which are another way. Cities and networks are really one. Ziggurats is the third way. And one thing that I think is really cool about Babylonia is that these three categories, right? Farms, cities and networks, ziggurats, represent this spectrum of potential points. Farms is get points right now. Immediately, it says 7 points. If you put this farmer down on it, you get 7 points. So there's no speculation. It's worth 7 points. But there's the opportunity cost of what else could I have been doing? So what else you could have been doing is you could have been going for ziggurats, playing your pieces next to these cities, and these spaces are limited. There's only so many of these. And if you, once it's completely surrounded, have a majority of pieces around it, you get the points that you got for playing to it. So that's pretty clear when you're doing it, how many points you're going to get. But then you get a special power. How do you evaluate a special power? Is it going to get you more than 7 points would have gotten you? Is it going to get you more than, let's say you could get 3 farms, 21 points? Is the special power and the better than that? That's a question you have to ask while you're making this decision. And then in addition to that, you're fighting for control of different areas, and it's this like little emergent area control game where it's playing out on a real map. It's this hexboard in front of you, and there's points that you want to control so you can block other people, so that they can't get to making these large networks. If you can surround these cities when they score, if you connect them to other cities before they score, you could potentially get tons of points, and you could score those pieces way more times than you would ever score just playing a farmer to claim a farm. Maybe you could score it 3 times or 4 times or 5 times. So that just sends your brain down a path to magical Christmas land of what could be possible. And then you're trying to do all 3 of these things at once. And I think that for me, that type of decision of how do I diversify my portfolio of how I'm utilizing my pieces, taking all of these things into consideration at once. Do I speculate on what might happen, not being able to take into account what other people are doing and what their plans are? Do I go for just surefire points right now with my farmers? Or can I maneuver with these ziggurats, get some points now, get a power that's going to catapult me forward? There's a lot going on in this game, but I think that even just that core decision of do I bag points? Do I push? This gets at a lot of the things that y'all have been mentioning, tempo and what am I the beat down? All these different things. I think there is a beat down in Babylonia, but yeah, I love this aspect of games, right? How do I diversify my path through this decision space so I'm not all in? Or should I be all in?
That's very cool. Have you played Rebirth yet from Reiner Knizia?
No, that one looks so beautiful, and people seem
Well,
to really be loving it. Have you, Paul?
Pete and I played it. I guess it was last week, and we really enjoyed it. I haven't played Babylonia, which I know is a
Okay.
crazy town, but
Yeah.
from your description, it sounds somewhat similar, though surely much lighter on what it's doing. But I bet it's worth checking out for you.
Have you played Blue Lagoon?
I have, and I really like Blue Lagoon. I think that's a very cool thing. It's going to tie to my next decision when we get there.
Sick.
Yeah. I'm hearing a lot of is now the right time in your discussion of this decision in Babylonia, but also like as kind of a piece of that now the right time decision of sort of like the zigging while other people are zagging type thing too, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of meta stuff going on, right? Every one of these options is kind of a pool of points that could potentially exist, and you're kind of taking a piece of that pie. But then I think there's also this other element of how much risk should I take, right? Like of speculation. And
It's crazy.
right? Yeah.
It's just got so many different aspects of it in that one kind of tile placement decision. I can absolutely see why this is a favorite or the favorite game of yours.
Yeah, I like Tigris too, though. I've been playing that a lot again. Oh my gosh. Let me just fight with people. But yeah, okay. Pete, what's
All right.
another? What's another? This is your
All right,
is this your favorite? Your very
I mean,
favorite?
honestly, if I think about my favorite games, this is kind of something they share. And I feel like an idiot describing it because I don't know how to say it. And what I wrote on our planning document is splashy, thematic, memorable, swingy moves. And what I'm trying to describe is like the decision to do something that is surprising, that has a big impact on a shared board state, something that makes everyone at the table go, whoa, what? And there's a couple of games that I can think of that do this really well. Paul mentioned Diplomacy, but a game that my group was obsessed with when we started board gaming was the Game of Thrones board game, which we called the Board Game of Thrones. And when you play the Board Game of Thrones, you're putting these orders down on the board simultaneously, and then you reveal them. And that reveal is an amazing moment because everyone is just searching. They're like, what did everyone do? And then someone will be like, what? Because some sort of, maybe there's potential for betrayal or something like that. Another thing I think of is that I liked Dune Imperium. I thought it was really good. And then I played Dune Imperium Uprising, and I was like, oh, this is giving me what was missing from Dune Imperium. Because Dune Imperium is this game of like inches where, it's a race to 10 points, but everyone is just like taking one step at a time. Whereas Dune Imperium brings in the possibility that in a 10-point game, someone might get 4 points in one turn. And they made so many decisions up to that point that it looks like it came out of nowhere. But in fact, they've actually been making opportunity cost-based decisions the whole time to build towards that. Because I think that what I'm looking for at a game night with my game group is, I've mentioned this before, but like building memories. Like, I still remember games I played of the board Game of Thrones over 6 years ago, because these big swingy sort of like turn the tide kind of moments are things that we just told stories about and things that we would continue to reference. And our group chat the next day is full of like post game discussion of like, man, when you did this, I could have done this. And I think that one thing that my favorite games share is that they're games that after you play them, you want to talk about it. Like, what kinds of games promote that kind of thing? That the next day, someone wakes up and they're in the group chat first thing, and they say, man, I went to bed still thinking about the game. And everyone else is like, me too, me too. And I think that it's these big moments. And I do like a game that gives me the opportunity to make a big moment happen. I know that that's a vague decision. Like, I'm really in kind of like a fuzzy space here talking about this as a decision. But that's kind of, for me, what I want from a game.
I do think it actually makes sense as a decision. I think a lot of the things on this podcast hover around strategic decisions and how they interact with the mechanisms of a game. But the decision that we talked about with Jake of like, what do I bring to game night? How do I metagame? How do I build my deck is different. It does tie to strategy. And yours is similar to what Brendan's saying about expression. When a game gives you the opportunity to make the decision to play for big splashy moments, that's compelling and exciting for you. And not all games do that, right? For those that really have a deep connection to chess gives them an opportunity for some big splashy move, right? That everybody will remember and put an exclamation mark by on their score sheet.
But
And
it
I
might be
think
the
that that makes
difference of like pawn to c7 versus pawn to
exactly,
d6 or something.
exactly,
That's
exactly. And I
art,
think that
though,
that's
to
Yeah.
some folks. Yeah.
Certainly, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that that's just it's as reasonable a thing in games. Games aren't just about the decisions you make to play cleverly or win. They're about play, and those are play decisions.
Yeah, I absolutely. I think one of the interesting things. Well, first to your point, Paul, about us talking about like more tactical, strategic on board thing. I think partly that's because that's sort of like the easiest place to go to like really unpick and start talking about. And I think, you know, as a meta conversation, as that these other types of decisions is a place that we can really continue to go and continue to like grow our language as a show in the episodes to come. But on the point of like making these splashy big thematic decisions, I think it also that these are enabled by a game system does something that changes the the fundamentals of the decision space that players are engaging in. When I played the big Dune game, the fact that crazy stuff is can happen in that game changes the way that you approach it, changes the way you engage with it, maybe a little bit less from that like analytical brain space that we approach like Euros with, and more into, it allows us to like kind of lean into the thematics of the game, because we know that possibly if the Bene Gesserit player at the end of round 6 has picked the person who's won, then all this was for naught and they're going to win anyway. And then that's exactly what happened in our game with that person like betraying their own teammate. And that's something that we'll remember for the rest of our lives, even if, you know, the mechanisms of the game or whatever aren't something that I typically prefer.
Pete, do you think it's fair to characterize this as that, in a way, this is the decision to do the expected or the unexpected? And that's in some ways doing what is expected of us in a situation, or doing what is not expected of someone in our position, is a question we face all the time. We face it at work, we face it, when we're walking on the street, all these things. And often we just do what's expected. The bus shows up, we're at the bus stop, we get on the bus. You just you're going to put your clothes on, you put on a shirt on top, pants on bottom, socks on, pants. I mean, shoes. I don't wear 2 pairs of pants, but you get what I'm saying. But this is going back to, this is another example of games that you like, Pete, that sort of say, I'm thinking about, in some level, what other people are thinking I will do, and I'm making a decision to either act in accordance with that, or finding my moment to not do that. And what's the value of doing the unexpected? And I agree. I love that games let me explore the value of doing the unexpected.
Yeah, I also think that, there are certain types of players that will make the move that is fun more often than making the move that will win them the
That's
game.
good. Yeah.
And I think that I am a player who will make that decision sometimes. I even think, you talked about Reiner Knizia and Tigris and Euphrates. I think that game, even though it's this stuffy beige Euro, does have massive, big, splashy moments that totally shift a board state and send everyone on their back feet in a way they didn't see coming.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like these style of we're talking about sort of decisions that aren't just on board in-game decisions. And the one that I'm about to talk about is on board, but it was the last one that I put on because I thought it was sort of the smallest in a way. It was the hardest for me to really tie down to, like, what are the strategic elements of this decision? But knowing my own personal taste, this is my favorite thing to do in games, and that is decide where something goes. I love tile placement games. And the big thing is there, number one, which tile do I want? But secondly, where am I going to put this thing? And Rebirth does this in a slightly different way than most of them. It gives me one chip each turn, similar to a kingdom builder, and a wide board. And I can pick, where does this thing go? Am I going to go to my farm and keep chaining a bunch of points that are growing or growing? Or am I going to try to compete for this city that I know I need to hold on to because I have a mission card? But even in something like Isle of Skye, maybe at the end of a round, I only have one tile. And at that point, my only decision is, where will I put this thing? Am I going to put it here because I need to score that objective? Or am I going to put it there because it scores those two? But the thing I love about it isn't how opaque that decision is, or how clear it is, or if I can calculate those things or whatever. I just like the search of looking at the thing and playing the spatial puzzle. And, playing Barenpark, there are lots of things to consider about, should I try to complete this square for those points? Or should I try to take the higher tile panda thing? Or should I try to race for this? But the thing I like is just looking at my board and looking at the shapes and figuring out what I can put there. And for me as a gamer, those types of decisions just kind of tickle my brain in a way that keeps me coming back.
I think there's an aspect of this too that's almost hard. Maybe not every human on Earth feels satisfaction of pressing in the last piece on a jigsaw puzzle, but there's just something about that. I put this thing in the exact right place that, even devoid the context of a game, it just feels great. So I love it as well in a game when I get to have those kind of feelings, because I just found the nice little spot where this connects to both of these and does something else for the game. It just feels wonderful.
Yeah, this is one of those things, Paul, where like Tetris, in my mind, has this clear thesis. the struggle for order in the face of, encroaching chaos that will come and disorder. And I think that as humans, I totally agree, Jake. Yeah, I think I would venture to guess. I don't know how I would prove this. Like if I was actually being asked to from a scholarly perspective, which I'm not, thank goodness. That humans have this innate desire for order, and that these games play into that. But then also, Paul, these games come with typically really clear feedback. Games oftentimes, like we always talk about this, right? You get options, you make a choice between those options. But the cool thing about tile placement games and spatial puzzles like this is that after the game, you can look down and you have a visual map of the decisions you made in a way that when you play a game that doesn't have this component, you can't look back and see a map of your decisions and interrogate them in the same way. There's something about that visual component. You said tickles your brain. I bet it literally tickles your brain in a way
Mhm.
that's different, than
Yeah.
playing haggis and the spatial puzzle there. And it's this connection between the sort of spatial math part of your brain and maybe efficiency math part of your brain that's like taking salt and pepper, peanut butter and jelly, and just and you get this
Yeah.
cool new thing. Yeah.
And I think what you're saying too about like looking down at the end of the game and seeing what you have, I very much prefer games that are build this to hit this. And these games give me that over and over.
Yeah.
To speak to what Brendan was saying, and since we're kind of, I don't know about you all, we're getting in this discussion, we're getting philosophical, like we're going outside of games. And I do think that the desire to organize is such a human thing. So my wife is not a gamer, but she plays some video games, and she loved this cute video game she found called Unpacking. I don't know if any of you have
Mm.
played this game, but it's literally just a video game where you unpack boxes and organize them in a room, and she finds it so fun and so soothing. And there's like a whole genre of video games based around this. I think is this the cozy game renaissance? Is it like the desire to be tidy? Is that what we?
I think that's part of it, and I have played unpacking. Everyone in my family loves unpacking. I do think that there's something about it which is the tidiness, and there's something about it which is like things are right in a cozy game. Things are they're furry and it feels right, and they're cute and it looks right, and you want to be there.
I'm going to segue into my final decision selection, because I think it pairs so nicely with this conversation we're having. And I'm in good company here because while I've been going broad, I also chose to zoom way in for my number one decision in game. Because as I thought about this, I reflected and I realized I just really love dice placement games. Anytime I get the opportunity to roll dice and then decide what to do with them, I picked the Castles of Burgundy's main action selection mechanism as my kind of answer to this question. But when it shows up in Trois or uh, Voyages of Marco Polo,
Civolution.
another one I love. Yeah, I mean, Civolution by Feld, Oracle of Delphi by Feld, Merlin by Feld, Macau by Feld. There's all, wherever it shows up, I have found that I really enjoy it. But the reason I think it pairs, so I like it because of so much of what we're talking about in the last part of this conversation, where there's one of the things I go to game for. Yes, it's nice to kind of have those like big human feelings of like trust and betrayal that you get in the Resistance, or like create art that I feel like you're doing when you're, curating and the perfect game night or perfect deck or whatever. But a lot of what I go to gaming for in my life is to have that like brain massage feeling, right? I play a good strategy game, it energizes me, in the same way that probably like really extroverted people feel energized by like going to a party or whatever. Like for me, I can play Castles of Burgundy and feel better. I feel rejuvenated. I feel recharged. And I think the reason for that is in this like little bit of mechanical artifice where I know what I want to do, but the game forces me to fight through this like very simple dice roll. And in that way, I think it almost is the disorder part of the bringing order to disorder in the tile placement type decision.
Jake, I just want to say it's probably not a coincidence that the game that I turned you on to trick taking with is Nikosu Dice.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, I don't know what it is about it, man, but it like whenever I want to say too that it like Castles of Burgundy was like the thing that turned me into like a hobby board gamer. Like I had played some other games, but when I played that, I was like, that's it for me. Like I love this stuff. And I think partly like at that time it was because I had played Sorry and whatever like games Risk, right? Games with like output randomness, but like input randomness in that way was like a revelation to me too. Um, and yeah, so I think maybe it's partly because of like that early experience with it, but literally anytime I see this mechanism, I even like challenge myself, but I just like it every dang time.
I think, Jake, that you, from what I've seen, we spent a few hours talking about these things, that you really enjoy games that have big problems that you're going to chip away at over the course of the game. That's a lot of games, big puzzles, chip away over the course of the game, but where the game forces you to focus on something now, like you're saying. And so when you roll the dice, maybe you're trying to accomplish this broader task in the Castle of Burgundy. I want to fill in this area, roll the dice. You were kind of talking about, so what's the best way I can do this? But I think the reason why you like that is similar to, let's say you were standing on a stage and Paul, Pete, and myself are each going to just take, I don't know, frisbees, baseballs, whatever, and throw them your way. And you're going to prove to us that you can catch them all, still doing your like the performance you were going to do already. And I think you like games that force you to be flexible and find a new path each time. And I think these decisions kind of enable that. I don't know. Maybe there's not as much there, but I think that, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that does make sense, and it resonates with something that I like in games too, which is sort of like responding to the input randomness, like you said, or
Yeah.
responding to the move that just happened. I think that's very cool. Jake, have you played Coimbra? Or there's another way. Do you like dice drafting games as well, like something like a Grand Austria Hotel?
Yeah, love Grand Austria Hotel. I played Coimbra once,
Little
and
dry,
I played at like the end of a long day at a con, so I need to try it
uh,
again before I can give like a fair take. But yeah,
sure.
basically, yeah, something about dice and just kind of like allowing. I think it, while it adds a restriction, it also gives your brain the opportunity to focus on something else, right? It like cuts through the noise at the same time that it's challenging you in some way. I think there's something there that might be part of the reason why it just works so well for me.
These games also have really clear probabilities usually. And I think I feel like there's something about your taste, Jake, where you like those clear probabilities because then you can get to the puzzle of the game, right? Like the outcomes are clear, so it feels fair to you. And then you can just show how good you are at doing the thing, and you're quite good at it. Okay, so my game, the final one I want to talk about, I don't know if it's my favorite decision in games of all time, but it's one I really, really love. And this is uh, in the game Broom Service. Broom Service is this, how do you describe it? This card-driven game in which you are trying to brew potions and deliver them to physical locations on the map. To do this, you have these little pawns that you're moving around the board from region to region with different terrain. So maybe you're in the grasslands, and then you move to the hills, and then to the plains, the snow, things like that. But each of you have cards in your hand that talk about those different terrains. And maybe this one is the Hill Witch, so it lets you move into an adjacent hill. Or maybe this one is the Weather Fairy, and that lets you remove a weather cloud that's blocking not just you, but everyone from moving. And then later you can trade in that weather cloud for points. Or maybe this one lets you brew potions. So it's sort of this downbeat turn. We're going to fill up your potion stores, but you're not going to actively score new points. So you all sort of uh, you pick some cards that you're going to play, and then you take turns playing those cards that you've picked that you're going to play. And when you play them, you have two modes that you can play them in. You can declare I am the brave, and then the name of the card that you have. So literally within the game, I am the brave Hill Witch. If it in the rulebook instructs you to use this language. I am the brave Weather Fairy, or I am the cowardly Weather Fairy. You have to use brave or cowardly. If you are brave, you get this large effect. And these effects feel they don't just feel like a large effect, it feels like a complete effect where you're doing the whole thing. Oftentimes this will be like brew a potion and deliver a potion or something. So it feels meaningfully important. Or you can be cowardly and you feel like a coward because you're only getting half an effect. You're only doing half the thing. And sometimes half is good enough. But the other piece of this decision point that's really, really, really important, right? Because why wouldn't I just pick Brave every time then? If it's the whole thing, why wouldn't I just do that every time? Is that you go in order around the table. And if someone comes after you, if you declare, I am the Brave Hill Witch, let's say the four of us are playing, I'm going to go first. I say, I'm the Brave Hill Witch, gets to Paul. Paul says pass, gets to Pete. Pete says pass. And then Jake goes, no, I am the Brave Hill Witch. And he steals that action from me. And I don't get to do anything at all. Instead of, this great full turn, I skip a turn. I think this is amazing. This is one of my favorite decisions games. I've forced to think about what other people are doing at the table. I have to decide how greedy I am, right? You will never win a game of room service by saying I'm the brave X every single time it's your turn. So you have to know when you should push, when you should take a risk. That's really fun. And yeah, I don't know. The spectacle of it, I think, is also just really delightful, appealing, embarrassing when you get it wrong. Someone is invited by the game to just say, no, you're not, right? And you maybe really thought you were the Brave Hill Witch, but it's actually Pete.
And I actually do love this part of Broom Service. Like saying no, I am the brave whatever is just such a fun thing to do at the table. And I think that what you're describing here is a lot of what's satisfying about playing traditional card games, where you're given a hand of cards. Like I think about our decision from Haggis that we talked about in our last episode of like when to use that bomb, right? That it's when is the time to push, when is the time to take a risk, and so that and people have compared Broom Service to trick taking games because of this whole lead and follow kind of thing. And I do think that what you're describing is something those genres have in common. That I have this limited number of tools and I have to choose when is the time to take a risk with this hand of cards.
Totally. I'll add very quickly that the rulebook even uses the word trick, pursuant with the tradition of just abusing the language of the genre.
Yep. It's sort of like a Trump effect is what I've
Yeah,
felt.
totally.
And there are some games like this where you trick taking games where you think is now the right moment to use this, or does somebody have the higher trump card in this moment, or are they out of the red so that they can do the thing that's going to defeat me? I'm so early in this trick. Should I do it now? And that is really fun.
I like how the like verbiage I think is so important to this decision of the fact that you have to say out loud cowardly or brave. At least every table I've taught this game to really embrace that aspect of it, and it turns what might feel like okay, a full effect or a half effect or like a trump in like a trick taking game into something that feels much more like what Pete was talking about before as like a big swingy moment that people are going to be talking about in the group chat the next day.
That's exactly right, Jake. And I was going to bring up that one thing that this enables is something we've gone back to a couple times in this episode, which is expression. Because when you say that you're brave or cowardly, it gives you these moments to like be funny. And I think that games that like signal to you like here's where you can kind of be silly is huge.
I think the expression is even more than that because not only does it allow you to be like, put on a show for your friend as you like make a really like demonstrative like windmill slam of your card, but the mechanism also allows you to be like expressive as a player, like with your agency. I think Brendan's exactly right when he says you can't win this game by playing brave every time. You definitely can't win this game playing cowardly every time, but you probably can win this game playing brave 80% of the time, and somebody could win it playing brave 20% of the time, right? And different people, some being more risk averse, some being more risk taking, are gonna both have a chance to succeed in this game through like clever and strategic play.
I love too that this game, with this decision, because of the way the map works, you get to watch everyone in the decisions they're making and then get a sense for when and why people start to take risks, and when and why people start to take when people will just take the sure bets, that reveals something to you about who they are, the types of decisions they like to make, and then gives you the opportunity through making lots and lots and lots of decisions like this over and over and over to exploit that learning. To me, that's so fun. Like, I love playing a game and sort of saying, okay, this combo of cards is really good. That's fun. And unlocking that is kind of like Paul in the spatial puzzles, like finding the perfect place. That's another part of your brain where it like brings together these pieces for me. But one of the most fun things in games for me that brings the resistance and broom service and the spatial puzzles together in broom service is, oh, I know Jake is gonna try to run up to this mountain and score this potion right now in the greediest way possible. And I don't even need to move into a mountain. I just know Jake wants to. So I'm just going to play this card to punish Jake. And it's going to be the right decision. That feels so cool to me.
Super cool. We've seen a ton of really interesting decisions in games. And the thing that I'm sort of thinking about as I consider the whole wide range of stuff we talked about is that, like, we love games and we love to play them. And it is the decisions that we make that, connect them to us. But it's really about our identity. When we say I am the brave hill witch, we're saying something about ourselves, and that has more power than if we just said I'm going to play weak. I'm going to play this card. I am this card. And the games that we decide to bring, the types of games we love, as we play them, we're defining ourselves, right? I go back to this quote: life's not about discovering yourself, it's about creating yourself. And when we play, we have an opportunity to do that through the decisions that we make. So thank you guys for having us for this conversation. I loved it. And that's the 200th episode of Decision Space.
Is this the time that we surprise announce the end of this project, or do you guys think we should keep going with 201?
Shut it
next week?
down!
Just
I'm
kidding.
keeping this microphone.
We are what we choose to do, I think, is what you're saying, Paul. And I think we'll choose to keep making the show, Jake. And you better come along. You better come along. We got to talk about expression. We have to talk about Age of Innovation. We have to talk about spatial puzzles. Paul, I've been wanting to do an episode on spatial puzzles forever. Jake just says to me, you can't do an episode on a topic that big. And I say, for sure. Paul and I recorded that one.
That's right. I love spatial puzzles, and I know a lot of them.
Jake, what's next?
I thought Pete was going to talk.
Yeah, sorry. I tried to signal that I didn't need to, but I failed. But I do think that if people want to know what's coming up, we do, like Brendan said, have lined up an Age of Innovation deep dive if you all want to get to playing that. A game that appeals to the high search tastes of Jake and the sort of fighty tastes of Pete all in one game. So definitely stay tuned for one of those and try and get a few games into that.
Cool. Well, thank you all so much for this wonderful conversation. I had such a good time. I don't want to end, but it must, because we are at the end of this episode. So as always, if y'all want to join us for this conversation, tell us what your favorite decisions are in all of games. The best place to do that is in our Discord. So you can join that by using the link in the description of this podcast. You can also find more stuff at decisionspacepodcast.com or email us at decisionspa@gmail.com. So until next week for the 201st episode, that's the end of the 200th episode. Thanks y'all so much for listening. And we should thank Hembry for our intro and outro song, Reach Out. Bye y'all.
Bye, y'all.
See ya. Super fun episode.
Guys, that was